G'day, everyone. Today I'm kicking off my first podcast with a quick dive into a seismic shift in how we find and get paid for content on the internet. Over the past year, Google's AI overviews and tools like ChatGPT have turned the old send us traffic and we'll send you clicks bargain on its head. And the numbers are pretty stark. Zero-click searches on news sites have jumped from 56% to 69% since Google rolled out its AI summaries in May of last year. Users get their answers straight in search without ever visiting the publisher's site. In that same period, organic traffic to news publishers plunged from 2.3 billion down to 1.7 billion. It's like a 25% drop. ChatGPT prompts about news have soared nearly 200% since January of last year, and referrals from ChatGPT to original articles climbed from under 1 million clicks to over 25 million. But here's the catch. Even without that growth, AI referrals aren't coming close to replacing the traffic loss from Google. SEO impressions no longer reliably translate into clicks, and the era of the 10 blue links is clearly winding down. Publishers aren't taking this lying down. European news outlets have filed an antitrust complaint against Google, arguing that there's no opt-out of AI overviews without sacrificing presence in regular search. Meanwhile, savvy entrepreneurs are already busy building the next generation of generative engine optimization. New tactics to be discovered by AI agents rather than humans. So I'm now having a conversation with someone that I respect their opinion of, Bahjat. He is a member of SSW in our SSW TV team. He is originally from the US. He's also worked in Hollywood and he's got a pretty unique perspective about this. But secondly, it's the launch of a podcast that I'm going to do where I talk to tech leaders. Coming up, I've got people from China because there's a lot of that geopolitical angst between the two countries, the US and China, with regards to AI. There's also someone from Europe I'm going to speak to. We're going to speak to some of the engineers within SSW, some industry experts as well. So this is the first episode. Welcome to the first episode. Hopefully the topic catches you. And let's get into the conversation with Bahjat and I.
So firstly, initial reactions, Bahjat.
Well, it's not the first time that some new technologies come out, and it's a part of a paradigm shift. For me, I'm kind of like wondering, what's going to be their angle on this, because they've probably done some kind of stopgap planning and things like that, because as you've heard, there's been some court case stuff coming up that's talking about Google as a monopoly on the search world, and seeing, well, how are they going to plan their way around that in the event that they actually end up moving forward trying to break up Google and separate Chrome from its kind of like parent company.
Well, it's interesting strategically, but where I wanted to take the viewers on a journey is that over the last year and a half, I've been super focused on the marketing generally, because I'm in sales and marketing, and I wanted to sort of start this by talking about how people, find and buy stuff, because the way people would buy stuff would be generally it was to solve a problem. And the problem is that, my car's broken, I need a new car, or I've got a problem with my website, I need to fix my website. And what would happen is that people would Google for solutions to the problem. So often what would happen would be that people would start asking the internet questions to solve the problem. And this happened in advance of them looking for a product, because what would happen first is problem would happen
Mm,
first, then that they would understand the problem and try to work out what some sort of solution would be. And then they try to find a good value for money solution, and then they try to do a transaction. And sort of, if you think about it in those three steps, Google used to be right up front with help me solve the problem, which often formulated the idea of what sort of product you would get. And you would actually go down this road of going, oh my word, for instance, SSW as a solution provider, we've been building, quality software for many years, and we put out a lot of content. And often, if you were trying to solve a problem in building software, um, our media might come up and might answer the question, and you would say, these guys are fairly competent of what they do. Maybe
mm,
I'll talk to these people about solving my problem. But that has
yeah.
sort of fundamentally broken now, because what happens is that people are asking questions to AI, and that doesn't always influence you to the people answering the question. Because if SSW answered your technical question, you would
Yeah.
trust them. But now the AI answers the question.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about like, uh, like a service like Perplexity, or now that ChatGPT is actually starting to have plugins or extensions that you can add to your already, whether you're using Edge or Chrome or any of that stuff. Because now for a while they've been using Gemini as kind of like their AI overview, first answer system. um, it's one of those things where I I think it's still it's kind of akin to, remember when things started popping up online, or stores started popping up online, right? And they didn't have the overhead of like a brick and mortar location, but they would still go into, let's say, an electronics store or something like that, and they'd pick the minds of the people who were there, and they'd be like, "Oh, thank you very much for your time," and then they go and take that information and they pop it in, right, to the internet, and they try to find the version that's available online that naturally is going to be less expensive because they don't have much of the overhead, right, that's going on. But I still think that people still need to inform, right? Like there's still that element of like, where is that information coming from? Is it vetted? A lot of searches now come up and they'll have the logic or the response, and then there'll be an associated link that goes with it. And in the last 6 months, what's happened is Google searches haven't, what's the word? Like there's been an uptick in what I would call people prefacing things, because more often than not, when people are looking for an answer, they structure it in like the most rudimentary way. So it's like car sound problem, right? Or computer screen issue. And then what happens is they get like essentially like a search dump, and then they siphon through it. Now maybe AI is helping with the initial aspect of like doing some of the siphoning, right? But there's still a vetting process to it, which is why a lot of people have been adding just the word Reddit to their search function, right? Yeah. Because Reddit has currently become one of the highest trafficked sites, because you get that discourse that happens where it's this constant vetting process.
Well, one of the theories behind the Reddit, because Reddit you didn't used to appear on page one of your Google searches, but the reason so Google had this principle, what they call EEAT, which is expertise, experience, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. I think I was right. But it's effectively what they're trying to do is they're trying to get human written content, because I think before about the middle of 2024, they were very anti-AI, and they were trying to weave AI out of the search terms, because they could see that in ChatGPT 3.5, it was fairly easy for someone to put together a blog post, claim that they're an authority on a subject, put it up on the internet. And what happened for sort of from 2023 to 2024, there's this tsunami of stuff on the internet. So Google have, for the last 2 years, been tweaking their algorithms. Now, we've got to remember that Google, this is their biggest revenue spinner. This has made Google one of the richest companies on the planet because companies all across the world would pay money to be on first page of Google because they understood how important it was to be up at the pointy edge of that sort of sales funnel of trying to influencing people on their buying decision. And you're right, people sometimes would go into a trusted person in a bricks and mortar store, try the shoes on, and then go and buy it online. That always happened, but that's a fairly sort of FMCG sort of consumer product where the value is established. But if you're talking about a consultancy or what car to buy or something where you need to trust the people giving you advice, and the trust and the advice and the expertise is woven in with the transaction, then you really needed the people giving you advice into which way to go. Um, and the internet was great for that. And Google used to win that game. And their fundamental business model was that people like our company and many companies around the world would pay money to Google to be on first page and to be influencing the way people would investigate a problem. We'd get up ahead of the problem, we'd influence them, and when we have the thin edge of the wedge, which is the transaction, we're a trusted party. And if they could get the SSW product for a great value price, internet has served its purpose. But what my fundamental thing now with all of this new news is that model has broken. We answer
Yeah,
questions in AI. Yeah,
yeah,
please.
well, no, because I was thinking, like, as you were talking about this thing about, like building authority and things like that, is that, well, if there's the AI aspect of it, is that, because there's all kinds of security protocols or like guardrails that they put into their fine print that you can read about how they're taking their approach and how they're running their models and stuff like that. But then, are you suggesting something akin to like, like a tick, like a verified tick mark or something like that? Because we saw how it's like it worked for It worked for a long time because if you called yourself a public figure or something like that, and then you had a certain amount of, subscribers or followers or whatever, it was relatively easy to find out, okay, you're actually a real human, content creation, and you've got like a track record and stuff. But then they themselves kind of like stuck their foot in it when they offered a pay to win, basically, where you could buy your own tick mark, right? Yeah, granted, visually it looked different, but then are we expecting companies to create their own kind of like verified thing? And then is that going to be the new kind of like sponsored and or ad model for the online searches? Because, do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I do know what you mean. So here's a couple of interesting points which you may or may not know. There was a recent, about 6 months ago, is an analytics firm broke down Google searches. And what they
Yeah.
found was that over a third of Google searches where a company was paying for clicks. Now, this is that someone is, by Google's reckoning, in the market for a product or a service or to answer a question. You're in the market where the company that ultimately gets the click has to pay for that click. Remember that Google charges you based on the click. They don't charge you based on a conversion. They track conversions, meaning how many things you sold. They track it, but they don't charge you based on that. They say, okay, so we presented the ad to the consumer or the piece of information. They've clicked on it, you pay. That's how their model worked. Now, whether they came to your website and they converted because they liked your product, your price, or your service, whatever, Google said, we've got some advice, we give you good guidance, but we're not linking how much you pay Google on that conversion. They are linking what to the click. Now, what happened 6 months ago is they did an analysis and they found that more than a third of the searches were people using Google as a glorified bookmark bar. And what I mean by that is that I want to go to Nike.com and buy myself a pair of runners. And rather than typing https://Nike.com go, I would just put the word Nike in my browser bar through Google Chrome. And what would happen is the Nike website would come up. I'd click on it. Guess who's got to pay for that? Mr. Nike. And I knew Nike. The fact that I wanted to buy the Nike shoes and everything to do with the purchasing, all of the stuff that made me want to make that decision happened well before I got to my Google search bar to type Nike.com in it. So sort of what I'm seeing here is that this whole business model of influence has changed. And the fact that now people are using Google as the bookmark bar, it's sort of changing the way we are influenced and the way people buy. For instance, I'll give you a for instance. So I know that there was a product at Kmart, who's a cheap department store in Australia. I think they're across the world as well, but in Australia, they're sort of budget price. They've got some good stuff. And my friend saw a TikTok, and the TikTok person was showing how one of their products was used in a really practical, it's a 30-second little video that influenced my friend to want to buy this product. So they said, I know that I'm not going to get a better price from Kmart. I think they went on to Temu or something to see if they could find that product for a better price. But the Kmart was local, so all these factors of price, availability, how fast the delivery, how much the delivery costs, all that sort of stuff was the transaction. But how I was influenced was through a TikTok. The olden days, you used to be influenced by going to Google and going to blogs and maybe going to videos. But what I'm effectively saying is that AI has broken that model. And I know that you were saying before that Google's going through some legal action in the US with them trying to break apart Chrome and Google because they were a monopoly. Maybe the horse has bolted? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing is even if let's say they went through and they actually separated Chrome, right? Is that I think there's an aspect of it where they'll be like, well, you can have all of the performative and mechanical aspects of Chrome, but I reckon they're going to figure out some way of shielding their database, right? Because the reality behind it is that no matter what, until capitalism actually crushes itself, is that they're going to figure out a way to commodify everything, right? And so whether the convenience, right? Because like you said about putting, you put in a search term in the bar and it takes you to the website. You're paying for convenience, and they've manufactured that into like their costings. Basically, is that because it's been a long-standing story, but the two founders of Google, the reason why, if you go and you actually like do a Google search, you'll notice at the top it'll actually tell you in milliseconds how long it took the search to occur, right? And that's because one of the founders is obsessed with efficiency, so much so that he used to keep like essentially like a chess timer on his desk. So people would come in, they want to have a chat, he'd go click, right? They finish the chat, he'd stop it, and he'd be like, could we have done that any faster, right? Like, could you have conveyed that information any faster? And so I know it's kind of like a side tangent thing, but
Imagine
it's
if
one
you're
of
in the
those
pub
things.
with him and you're sitting there, I just thought I'd shoot the breeze with you. Ding.
Time's up. Yeah, try again.
Yeah, exactly.
And because what innately that speaks to is the framework of this convenience, right? When you're talking about your friend who went and said, "Oh, where can I find this? Is there a couple other places I can find it?" And then kind of stacking all of those things, and that has become a feature, like a value add for a lot of things. But my concern with that, and that one of the practical examples of it is like just trying to buy airline tickets, right? Is that you have the websites track your IP address, and they go through and they limit the number of options that you have. And maybe what they do is they create a false sense of urgency, right? With what they're going to display because of how they've written, the website HTML codes and stuff like that. And I feel like AI might end up going down that track, right? Where because it gets kind of like you talked about, bolted onto other things, is that you could search for a solution and just be like, 400,000 other people have been looking for solutions for this thing, right? Where it maybe creates kind of like not necessarily a false narrative, but maybe an exaggerated narrative. And you're like, only 30 remaining in Melbourne for this particular thing right? And so, but the reality behind it is that it would have to become a little bit more pervasive then, because ultimately it's still a language model, right? And so it's one of those things where are you talking about changing the state of like how AI, like the machine learning models and stuff like that, and then having them connect to, because in our last discussion we're talking about agents, right? Does that mean every corporation is going to, or every company designs its own AI agent that interacts with the AI agent like sphere of searchability, right?
Oh,
And then that becomes the new search function, is that you'll just drown because you don't have an agent that talks to how the rest of the world is searching for things.
So I fundamentally think that there are such big paradigm shifts going on at the moment that almost everything is up for grabs, and everything in a sort of a marketing sense. So I got to stack all these things together. So the behavior of humans generally about the way they buy and their influence to products or services. I did mention that early. And there was a way of doing things, and there was a set paradigm of how we did things. That is fundamentally changing with AI, and that's dangerous, which I think many people have said is that it offers you one or two solutions, where you used to get a confusing list of all these options of what's true, and you go, "Oh my gosh, I've got to wade through this stuff." Don't know whether that's better or not, but now
Well,
AI asserts one thing.
yeah, but here's the thing: is there's still this overarching dominant reality that says this historically, right, since the beginning of all mercantile commerce thing, is that if someone that says that something that you're looking for is good, you're gonna get it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Word of mouth
it's going to
is big.
significantly influence, right? And so, and this was actually content that came out from marketers who are on social media platforms who are talking about this notion of fabricated consent, right? So, because last time we were talking about different kinds of video generation and AI imagery generation, and VO3 now is like, yes, most of the material now is just kind of like, it feels like satire, where it's kind of talking about itself in the third person and poking fun. But if you take that to the next level, where this aspect of our interaction with it is conditioning us to be like, oh, AI, you're just so silly. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we start seeing things that are structured in a way that is meant to influence you, right? So instead of that friend who saw the social media post about the thing in Kmart, it's Kmart who's fabricating the influence now, right? And so
Wow,
now that you're seeing a
you're going another step through it, and that's I think what you're doing is actually you're correct because let's take it back to Google. So more
yeah,
recently, if you Google something, you'll see that Google answers the question within the browser, and now part of this new data that's coming out is that they're finding that there are growing percentage, like growing every single month. Things are just changing so
mm,
fast in this. So it's growing every month. Amount of Google searches where there are no clicks, meaning I've answered my question, I'm off to do whatever I want to do. And they may
yeah.
show you more reference, but they'll also show you videos and they'll show you stuff. So they're actually, you know,
And that's
fortunately
something you
for
talked about
them.
before, right? Which is called, it's called pogoing, right? I think you mentioned it to me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When you
Well,
go
pogo,
searching and
pogo sticking. Yeah, pogo sticking is that what Google did a lot is that with their algorithms is got to remember their algorithms was meant to go and read the internet and basically say, rate one page is better than the other to answer this particular query. So they've been using AI for a long time. They're not
mm,
reading the content. They're just got computers and a lot of mathematics. But they would one of the things they would do is look at your behavior on the internet. So if you searched in best shoes in Melbourne for barefoot running shoes in Melbourne
yeah,
in this area. If an answer came up, number one or number two, you clicked on the link and it didn't answer your question and you came straight back to Google, they call that pogo sticking because it's basically saying to
yeah,
Google, you didn't find the answer to your question. And so
yeah,
they would actually give that page a rating that was a fraction less. So it's
mm,
incentivized people to build your web pages or your product pages and all that sort of stuff to be exactly to the query that the person. You've got to remember that that's the whole game is that
yeah,
answer the question that the person asks, offer the product that they want, and do that in the least amount of clicks. So Google were
yeah.
really good at that. And what basic premise for this whole conversation is that the game is changing. I see a rise in YouTube videos influencing. I see a rise in TikTok and other video mediums where that human connection um, of someone
Well,
recommending a product or a service.
yeah, the influence thing is, I mean, that's become ubiquitous. But like what you're talking about with YouTube, which is quite interesting, is because from my experience, you can each platform is kind of like gelling into its own kind of into a, I guess, it it it's like almost like a mode of transport. So like right now people are using Instagram where I just need to get your attention, right? In the sea of noise, I just need to get your attention right now. And then what happens is once I've got your attention, people do the digging by themselves nowadays, right? It doesn't take very much to stalk someone on, on LinkedIn and social media and really do a deep dive and figure out a whole bunch of stuff. So what they're doing is they're saying, I've got your attention, now go to my YouTube. Why? Because of searchability, right? Because Instagram and TikTok are horrible at like searchability. If you want to look for something, because it's so jarbled and it's such a big, huge mess that even if you use the most specific hashtags, or if you even know the name of the content, right, that you're looking for, it still just gives you a lot of gobbledygook. And so what people have found out is that the only way to kind of focus people is say, I've got your attention, go to my YouTube. Because YouTube is what? It's just a video version of search, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
so
and and
it's,
so I mean, YouTube is the second most popular uh, search engine of the planet. Number one, and number two,
yeah,
it's the most popular television station of the planet.
yeah,
And interestingly enough, as anyone who scrolls through social media, if anyone's looked at LinkedIn or Instagram or any Facebook, is they don't feed you stuff sequentially anymore. Haven't done it for years. They feed you stuff that they think you want to engage with, and they'll put stuff up. that's from 2 weeks ago from one of your friends because it's getting engagement elsewhere. And they'll miss the update from your mum saying, "Hi, such and such, here's an update from the family." They'll miss the stuff that's probably relevant to you to serve you something that's getting engagement because their algorithm gets engagement. That's how TikTok works and the like. Um, so it's a really interesting game because I sort of see Google and this recent announcement sort of taking it back to where we started this conversation is that the data, I think, doesn't reflect how much search traffic they're losing. I think that the influential part of what Google used to do, which is to influence people at the start of their buying cycle, on that research journey, I think that has fundamentally changed. And I think that now it's in video and social media and in AI, and that's effectively gone away from Google. And I think that the other thing is that's probably playing back into Google's is that once I've determined the product or a service I want to buy, I actually often are now going back to Google to find the website that I want. So Google are only showing me bookmarks and direction to get to the website. They're not influencing my buying behavior. And
Well, and I think
they're
what's happening is you're getting a split, right? You're getting a because the AI now is like you're talking about where they type in the thing, they get their answer in that overview, right? Is that I think what's happening is that drop off is actually like a societal shift where people are just there's a section of people just looking for answers. Looking for answers for things, and people looking to get something, right? And I think that the gap in that percentage is that it's now it's the delineation between the two. It's not saying that it's that their platform has less functionality. It's that because it has so much integrated functionality, is that you just go to it, you find what you want, and you go away, right? And then there's no more follow up. It's not, and that actually, I don't know, maybe is that going to be detrimental? Is there such a thing as like over efficiency, right? Because I've heard lots of people from, like Gen Xers and stuff like that say that they, much of their like learning or kind of like question answering and stuff like that lives on social media platforms. So some of them don't even touch Google, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And now within TikTok, you can get a link to the product. So someone said, "Hey,
Yeah.
look at my great little, necklace thing here. It looks great."
Yeah,
And this
exactly.
15 seconds, it's stylized. They got a filter on. It looks great. And the person said, "Yeah, that looks pretty good." There's a little link in
And
the
so,
TikTok. Click. Whole
and
transaction happens outside that Google sphere.
yeah, and what happens is they get to wrap it in a story, right? Because they can have a little skit about something, or they can put together some kind of like catchy performative thing, and then the next thing you know, at the bottom it says like shop, right? And we haven't even like delved into the notion of how much your phone is listening to you, right? Let alone what it's recording as far as like
Let's
what your
save
search
that
is.
one for another day. That's a whole topic
Yeah.
in and of itself. But
Yeah.
I mean, the whole topic here is that, and what I'm asserting for everybody is that the way the incumbent, which is Google, and their business model is fundamentally changing, and it's changed over the last 2 or 3 years. Now, I think I've mentioned it on other videos, but I have worked for a company called Kodak for 15 odd years, and I watched from the inside uh, a business virtually go from this behemoth down to virtually a very small niche business. They're still around today. But they effectively were internally didn't see the writing on the wall and how technology fundamentally changed their business. And what I'm saying and what the data is starting to show is that the whole Google business is changing. Now, is it going to morph to something better? I'm sure it will. But there's so much stuff going on at the moment that everybody's guessing. including us, as to what the future may hold. So watch this space, folks. It's going to be an interesting ride the next couple of years just in sales and marketing. So the way you used to get found has changed and is changing rapidly. So hire yourself a TikToker, I'm guessing, is probably one of the advices that you probably get from that. What would you say, Bahjat?
I mean, that is probably the single most pervasive role now. If you type in to any kind of job market thing, you just type video, and the first thing will come up is a combination of either social media marketer, content creator, content producer. Those are like the top three things that come out, right? And it's one of those things where you're taking the economical framework of marketing, and you're also taking the psychological behavioral aspect, right, of marketing, and you're putting it into this new visual forum. And now that things have this ability to essentially, if you see something you like, you can the conversion is almost seamless, right? As much as platforms hate for you to leave, right? Or go to another, or sometimes you get a warning box and it'll say like, "Do you want to go to this external link?" And as if they're having a little cry about it and saying, "Don't leave me," right?
Don't go.
But yeah, exactly. But the reality behind it is that's still what is paying the bills, right? It's about because for you and I growing up, it was eyeballs on TV. Now is eyeballs on screens, and it's becoming way more catered. Now, whether or not we're gonna see technology kind of shift to that kind of drastic degree that like what happened with like with Kodak is there's still, in our last conversation we were talking about this notion that I think as long as they kind of like keep in mind people's behaviors, and that's really what's coming down to, right? Because there are these these tried and true kind of like cornerstone aspects of marketing where it is about behavior, and it's about curtailing behavior and saying, if they can keep an eye on how behaviors are changing, and they just have to shift the touch points, right, with the products and the services that they have. I don't think that it's necessarily one of those things where you're going to have like this this evaporation of an entire thing. It's that you have to be a lot more mindful of what the current zeitgeist is, which is kind of a fancy way of saying just normative behaviors societally.
Mm.
Yeah.
It is really interesting because it's no time in my life, like the film thing happened over many years, digital cameras,
Yeah.
and since 2022 to 2025, it's changed so much, and this is still changing. So thank you for your thoughts on this one, Bahjat. Appreciate you joining me on
Anytime.
this on our lunchtime Wednesday rant. We'll have to give it a name, I think.
Brilliant.
All right. See you, everyone.
Bye now.